to the rock, sing to the tree, sing to the firefly lighting up the sky. Sing, sing to the sea.
Good afternoon, this is Miriam Macero of The Song, a show dedicated to singer-songwriters with their original music. And today we have in the studio Robert Sherwood, who's from Worthington, Mass. I've had the pleasure of working with for years, and he's incredibly talented on many different instruments, and today he's performing on the piano for us, and we're really happy to have you here today, Robert.
It's a pleasure to be here in beautiful, beautiful downtown Metro, South Deerfield, this lovely autumn day. Thank you. It's great to be on The Song.
So we'd love to hear a couple of your songs right now.
Okay. Well, that's right. I have to do that too. All right. The first song that I'm going to do today is called The Sins of Autumn, because obviously it's appropriate, it being spring and whatnot. And I figured when I did this show, something I'd do by way of motivation is to try to do all new material. I've been pretty light on material the last few years. Miriam and I have been working together a lot. I've been producing her stuff and helping with her stuff, and Miriam has no shortage of material. I've had people tell me, come into a recording session or something and say, I wrote 3 songs last night, I wrote 4 songs. And it's, is a bit of hyperbole usually to that. But no, when Miriam comes in and says she wrote 4 songs, she wrote 4 songs. So I don't have a bunch of new stuff, but I do have some interesting new songs that I'm going to try to pull off. And the first one, as I say, is called The Sins of Autumn.
To orange and orange to brown, this whole world is floating down, this whole world is coming down around me now. In the copper even fall, in a heron's lonely call, this whole world is falling down around me now, and you've lost your way, and you've gone astray. The sins of autumn, so much to answer for. So much to answer for, so much to answer for. There's no solace to replace when November's on the phone. Winter surely stills what autumn can't alone, and I'll miss your voice, but you had no choice. The sins of autumn, so much to answer for. So much to answer for, so much to answer for.
This is a song that I wrote several years ago called "Song for the Weary," and I wrote it at a time when I was very weary indeed, and very tired of pushing against things that weren't yielding and weren't going to yield, as far as music and careers and that kind of stuff. And I wanted to sort of encapsulate the feeling of being weary, but listening to that weariness and experiencing it not as a loss or a burden, but as something that is sometimes worth listening to. You know, I always used to joke my travails in the music industry. There's something about having something that you always felt was something that was in your future, a way your life was going to go, a way things were going to play out, and life generally has other plans. And it's like it's very difficult, you know. In our culture, there's this perception, there's this thing that you're told that, you know, about never giving up, and sometimes giving up is a really good idea. You didn't hear it from me, but sometimes, you know, you can ask Christy Finkelstein to the prom 30 times, and she's not going to the prom with you. So so that this song sort of digs into that a little bit. Song for the Weary.
It's never easy to answer a calling, but it's harder when that voice just goes away. And it ain't easy to make like it's no thing when you feel like you're throwing your youth away. So make it easy on yourself. Just go to sleep and let it end. Wake up to sunshine and the sound of children playing in the parking lot of Lexington. 'Cause you've had enough now. It's been a long, lonely road, but there's light around the bend. Some pretty young thing gonna whisper sweet nothings. Oh man, you're gonna love her till the end. So make it easy on yourself. Go back to sleep, it's just a dream. Wake up to sunshine and the lovely thunder rolling like the 805 down Market Street. Don't forget that even Joan of Arc got burned that time. And what about the things they did to Jesus Christ? Baby, you may never get a chance to shine. Maybe you can settle for a feeble glow from time to time. Oh, now, shine for me, baby. And make it easy on yourself. Go back to sleep, it's just a dream. Wake up to laughter, summer 89. Making records, making friends, and making time. Ooh.
So Bob, I'd like to hear about a little bit of your history. How did you get inspired as a musician? What was your first instrument?
Excellent question. I got inspired by songs. You know, I wasn't one of those kids who was fascinated with instrumental ability. You know, there was something for me. It was about the idea of the song as a narrative process, as a way of telling a story. You know, the stuff that really got me excited when I was a kid. I was of the punk rock generation. Well, maybe I was a little young for that, post-punk in the early 80s and stuff like that. And there was something in the narrative quality and the attitude of a lot of those bands. There wasn't, that era is famous for not being, you know, people not being really amazing musically, but they made do, you know, and the passion that was conveyed with this stuff. And a lot of these bands, you know, they started out in this sort of punk milieu, but they were clever. They were clever young people. They weren't really that, but they saw an opportunity. A lot of these people now will tell you, you know, they flew a flag of convenience, and they latched onto this movement because there was a time, you know, with this movement, particularly in England, where, you know, if you had spiked hair and a safety pin or two, yeah, you were going to get a record deal. And so a lot of these bands, you know, my favorite bands from that era were very mercenary, and they flew this flag of convenience and did a creditable job of it, and then had the careers that they wanted to have, you know, when they'd sort of established themselves. And that was really interesting and really exciting to me because a lot of these people revealed themselves to actually be very competent writers and very competent musicians. And not that there isn't, you know, a lot of valid stuff to be said in incompetence. It's some of the most beautiful stuff. Sometimes I wish I could roll back my competence a little bit because sometimes it gets in the way. And I started out on the piano. I had a little tiny, one of those little Casio keyboards they had in the 80s, a little tiny thing. And it had a piano sound, and it had like a string sound. And I would have been like 15 or so. And I used to drive my dad crazy. I had headphones for it, but even, you know, I guess even like the headphone sound bled through. And sometime around 2 or 3 in the morning, he'd call up and just tell me to knock it off, you know. And it was the fascination of learning. I mean, you remember this, learning what a chord is. It's like, oh, that's great. And there's a zillion of them, you know, and they all these chords that you play, you know, that has a flavor, and that has a flavor, and that has a, you know, a really complex flavor. And so for me, it was about like learning all these chords to serve songs, and not quite so much all the tasty stuff, because I just wanted I just wanted to be able to put a song across, you know, and all the tasty stuff, I didn't really feel like I needed it, particularly coming from the background that I did and the influences that I did. And that stuff kind of came later, you know. We used to joke about the idea of the song is paramount, you know. And if you need some tasty stuff in there, we'd just pick up the phone and call the tasty guy, you know. And he can come in and do that. And I kind of feel that way to this day. It's sort of central to my approach. I remember working with a band from this area, a band called King Radio, that were, well, they still are. King Radio is a very hard band to get on the road. It's like a 13-piece band, and they use a live string quartet, and they did an album that was out nationally a few years ago, and I got the call to be their touring bass player, which really excited me because the guy who produced the album played all the bass, a guy by the name of Peter Baldwin, and his approach to bass was so unique. Bass can be one of those instruments that disappears in the background, or it can be crucial. You know, your McCartneys, your Stings, your people like that. They make the bass line completely crucial to the song. You know, there's no song without that bass line. And Peter Baldwin was that kind of guy, and the bass lines that he played were so clever and so well thought out. They were so composed. They were Bachian, you know. They were so complete, and And when I got the nod to, because Peter Baldwin didn't like to be in front of people. You know, he was one of those guys, which I understand. If you're an ideas person, it can be an interruption to your ideas to get out on the road and have to spend all that kind of time. And Frank Padalaro, the guy who was the leader of the band, sort of the creative nexus of the band, told me once, you know, because he knew I was a real Baldwin fan. I was like, I want to play this guy's bass lines exactly the way they are, and I want to do it just the way he does it, and support this vision the way you had it. And he eventually told me, he was like, you know, Bob, you should know, you know, Peter, he didn't really play those bass lines, you know, from the beginning of the song to the end of the song. He didn't really do it like that. You're probably like a much more sort of kinesthetically skilled guy. You know, your fingers are more skilled than his, and you know, because he when he did those bass lines, he punched them in. You know, he probably punched them in a bit at a time. He played a little bit, and then, you know, recorded another little bit, and recorded another little, and I think Frank thought that was going to disappoint me, and that didn't faze me. I was like, you have not toppled my idol, because the ideas were not punched in, you know, the idea that he had. And as far as, I mean, how he executed, I don't care if, you know, if he did it measure by measure or called the tasty guy. He had the idea, you know, and that's what's exciting to me, the idea.
So you went from the piano to the bass, and then did you start your music career as a composer or a musician for filling in bands, or did you actually start your own band, or how did it all evolve?
Boy, I really gotta dig back. I went to college. My dad was in the Foreign Service. He was a diplomat, and I grew up overseas. And I came to college in this area in the early '80s, and the sweepstakes question, the mystery question for today is, what college could I possibly have gone to? Yes, that's right, Hampshire. And when I went to Hampshire, I just wanted to be on stage and playing with bands. I just wanted to do that all the time. And I managed to, Hampshire being what it is, I managed to, you know, sort of engineer a course of study that did that. And I could not pick an instrument. I couldn't pick an instrument. I wanted to see other instruments, you know. So I just kind of started dabbling in everything. Piano is what I'd started with. And bass came pretty soon after that. Because it's, like I said, it's an ideas instrument. You know, a good bass player, when you see a good bass player, it's usually because they're a person that has good ideas. You know, they might not be the flashiest ideas, and they might not be the most obvious upfront ideas, but in terms of the ensemble, you know, bass is a really critical instrument. You know, a lot of people don't know, and a lot of bass players don't know that you, when you're playing bass, you're sort of owning the harmonic foundation of the song. Like if people are playing in C and you hit an A, you've just redefined the chord. Or if they're playing in C and you hit an F in the bass, you've redefined the chord in a really dramatic way. And so if you start on piano and start with theory and start with chords and then move to bass, you're very dangerous indeed. You know, you can make stuff really good, or you can really do a number on somebody's harmonic intent. And then after that, I got into guitar a lot around that time too, and drums, and you know, all the major instrument groups. And my first sort of pro band was in this area. People of a certain age might remember the Malarians, who were we were kind of the band in the valley, you know, in the mid to late '80s. And in that band, I did a lot of rhythm guitar and a lot of keyboard. You know, the band was very influenced by sort of '60s garage sounds and psychedelic sounds. So the keyboard that I played was this wonderful, cheesy old Farfisa organ, you know, like a Vox organ. It has that really plastic sound, you know. And I'd play it standing up. I'd play it with my right hand, and I'd play a tambourine with the other hand. And you know, and we wore white Levi's and black turtlenecks, and we just kind of we had this thing, and we thought it was the coolest. We were all, you know, 20, and we thought it was the coolest idea ever in the world. And I remember playing a gig in Albany one night, and and we just thought we were the coolest thing. And the sound guy, he looked ancient to me. He was probably younger than I am now, but he was like, yeah, I used to have a band that kind of reminds me of you guys. It was, yeah, we all wore like white Levi's and black turtlenecks, and we had the Farfisa, and we were all like, really? We thought this was our, I kind of thought this was our thing. And after that, it was kind of, I started realizing, it's like, wow, we thought we were so original, copying this 60s garage aesthetic, and it's like, no, we're not particularly original at all. Very cool, and the white Levi's look great, but yeah, no, it wasn't the Stravinsky of rock and roll that we thought it was.
So you ended up, I know from talking with you that you ended up in California and playing the piano there in a band, or?
I didn't touch the piano in that era. I went to seek my fortune after the Malarians. I went out to LA to put together a band and, try to get the record deal and do all that stuff. And the band that I formed was called Fiction, and it was what they call a power trio: bass, drums, guitar. I played bass and sang, and it was a lot of it was an aesthetic decision. We're going to have a power trio. There'll be lots of space. We'll do this kind of thing. But a lot of the reason for that was really it's just easier to get three people to agree. Mm-hmm. It's easier to get three people in a van. It's easier, it's hard. I don't have to tell you, boy, it's hard to get a show on the road. Mm-hmm. And if you can do it with three people, it's that much easier than trying to do it with 4 or 5 or 6. Try to get that many people on the same page. The problem of the 3-piece is that the motel rooms have 2 beds. So either you're particularly close to one of your bandmates, or somebody's going to get the floor. And when we were touring a lot, we had various criteria for who ended up on the floor, and it usually had to do with who had acquitted themselves the least well that night. We would vote, and somebody would get the floor. And Fiction, we made a few records. We recorded for Rykodisc, a label that started actually here in Massachusetts. They signed us in must have been '99, and we did a couple records for them and had a couple decent radio hits. I Could Cry was kind of the big one. I think that was '99. And so we got to do that whole thing. People joke about, like, did you get really successful? Were you a rock star? And I always say, yeah, it was the worst 5 minutes of my life, because it looks a lot funner than it is, folks. There's a lot of things that you have to say yes to that you might not want to say yes to, and then a day comes when you can't say yes anymore, and you realize a lot of people that you worship when you were young said yes to things that you can't say yes to, and at that point, music became a completely different concern to me. It became a creative a thing. I kind of woke up the day after, saying no to things that people wanted us to do, and things that were expected of us. And I woke up the next day feeling incredibly liberated, because one thing I hadn't really been able to do was to, in all this time, just to see what I could do, to see what I could do, where the decision was being made based on what's the most creative thing, what's the most ambitious thing, what's the funnest thing, what's the most challenging thing, and not sort of like what's the thing that's gonna play in Peoria, because I think sometimes that's fun for younger people to play that game, to play the game of how am I going to interface with the culture, how am I going to get over in the culture, and what happens is at a certain age you lose that that sort of endless respect for the culture. Like the culture will say, the culture approves of me and embraces me, that says things about me that I need to hear about myself, and I don't think after a certain age you start realizing, A, the culture ain't all that, and B, I don't need things
said about me anymore. And if I really need things said about me externally that much, then maybe that needs to be hashed out in a therapist's office, not on the stage.
How would anybody who's interested, a big fan of yours, get to reach you? Do you have anything on the web?
Yeah, no, you can't get to me. I'm like the wizard, the Wizard of Oz. I'm just behind a curtain. Yeah, sure. I'm on Facebook. Just look for Bob Sherwood. You know what's a really good way to hear some of my music is Miriam uses this too. Django Radio. It's an online radio streaming site, and you can find me there if you look for Robert Sherwood. Django.com. That's a really good spot. Miriam's got stuff on there too. If you want to hear, most of my work these days is working in a producing and engineering and playing capacity for other people. So that's kind of where my focus is, and it serves a couple purposes for me. Miriam knows this about me. I'm completely allergic to self-promotion. I've done enough self-promotion for 30 lifetimes, and even just hearing it, just feeling it come out of my mouth, I don't enjoy it. So that says a little something about my future as a as a self-contained artist. I have lifted every other person on the planet by the lapels and told them how great I am, and that was many years ago. And I'm done. So, one thing I tell people is, if you like the music and you want to hear some of my studio stuff, I did an album I finished not that long ago. It's a double CD. It's called Good Expectations, which if you're a Dickens fan, you'll realize how wonderfully cynical that is. And if you want to email me, just email me. I'll picassoface@gmail.com, PICASSO face@gmail.com. I will send you a link to the entire album, 16-bit WAV files. Sounds like $1 million. And then maybe you'll just send $20 to your local ASPCA, which is it's a far better cause than me, or your local animal shelter. That's what I like. So you can have my music for free and maybe just throw a little bit their way.
Oh. Okay. Well, thanks for coming in today,
It's
Robert.
been a pleasure. It's been very enjoyable.
We'd love to hear a few more songs.
Good.
All right. Thanks. All right.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.
This song is for my little girl Sally, who I lost last October, just about exactly a year ago. My little Jack Russell, who was my best friend for 14 years, and that was 14 years with never a single lonely day. So just about everything I write nowadays is about Sally. So.